Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is Feb 26, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Hal. How in the heck do you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you.
Oh, that's okay. It's Bogotch.
Bogotch, Hal Bogotch. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in Santa Monica. I lived in Venice for 20 years, but now I'm a Santa Monica resident, and yeah, pretty satisfied about that.
Pretty cool. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Well, I'd say to be awake, to be alive, to be open to experience, and to be open to contributing, because it's both ways.
Yeah, I love it. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, I don't know if there could just be one favorite. I mean, I do sort of consume media. I think that the art of conversation, one on one or in a small group, hopefully that won't be lost. But my biggest opportunity for talking to people is when I walk our little dog and around the neighborhood and just talking with neighbors. But, I do listen to podcasts. Stream, watch things on YouTube and all those kind of media, read actual paper books that have binding and have been published by publishers. So all that stuff.
Cool. Did you become a reader mainly because your parents told you to read? They did it as an example or on your own?
That is a pretty interesting thing because I was an only child. And so there was a lot of time that I spent by myself. So I would get into reading, especially, as a young guy, reading science fiction, everything from Jules Verne to a little bit later on Kurt Vonnegut and, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, all that stuff. And, you know, just reading in general has helped, I think, fuel my mind, you could say, and heart and spirit.
Cool. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Um, I mean, I think that, we've evolved in a certain way to learn about our environment so that in the beginning that we could survive, but now, we still do operate on a survival level, but we're also, have culture and cultures. So we're developing this awareness of the world and our fellow humans. And so I'd say, that's why we do it, just to learn more and to be able to respond better and to, function on a higher level.
And how do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Um, I think it's pretty much part of our nature. I mean, we certainly have some backgrounds of indigenous people that have an oral tradition, passing down stories, and then later on things have been written, carved in tablets and made into scrolls. In my case, I'm Jewish, so we do look at the scrolls from time to time, and but just in general, passing along knowledge.
Do thoughts create emotions?
They're definitely linked. I think that focusing on something, in a certain way, can you can get start to experience different emotions, and sometimes there's things you just can't ignore. They're in your face, and you just get mad or afraid or whatever it is, happy, joyous. But yeah, I mean, they're closely related. I don't know exactly which one comes first, but we perceive things, and then we'll have a response. There's actually a funny thing that I was reading that, the shape of if there's a stick on the ground that's shaped like a snake, we respond to it as if it's a snake because it takes the brain a while to process. It's not a snake, it's a stick comes a little later, but those things are pretty wired into us.
Yeah, it's a good observation. Fill in the blank, Hal. I don't know what I think until I.
Uh, I, I don't know. I mean, I definitely respond by reflecting and very often writing or taking notes, uh, jotting down some thoughts, either on old fashioned pen, pencil, and paper, or even making a little Apple note. Uh, so, yeah, I'll respond, after kind of getting some thoughts together.
It's good. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Can humans think without language?
I mean, their language is a pretty basic part, but it is sort of in the evolutionary scheme, it's developed a little bit later, and so, it's funny. One of my favorite comedians, I don't know if you've heard of Billy Connolly, but
Yeah.
he's just a great, great comedian. He became an actor and all this stuff, but he has this thing, sometimes you just respond with like, so that's kind of pre-language, I guess. It's an utterance that you're responding to something in the moment, like terror, or in this case, he
Yeah.
was describing uh, wading into the North Sea, and when the North Sea hit him in the sack, that was his response.
Yeah. I like that. They asked, there's a great Andy Warhol interview where they ask him a question. He goes, can I just answer it by going glug, 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 glug? And they go, sure. So he goes, glug, 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 glug.
And that was the answer he went with.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Huh. Well, I mean, there often can be visual components, to something. I mean, people can communicate with, like it's that game where you draw something. What is that? It's a popular kind of parlor game.
Charades?
No, you draw. You draw. Anyway, I'll probably think of it. But
Yeah.
certainly, like with a PowerPoint, you're using visuals, and then the words have a lesser, sort of import. But yeah.
Your observations of humans in general. I know it's a stupid question, it's both and depends, but are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
I mean, I think that feelings are probably a little more primal. And then as we, have evolved, we have more thoughtfulness about the way we approach things. But yeah, I think that the feelings are down in there. Now, people can often be shut off from feelings. And I even have been, at times in my life, because there were maybe things that I didn't want to face. So I blotted them out. And then later, found that they came back and I can experience them. So,
Yeah.
doesn't really go away if you're cut off from yourself, I don't think.
Yeah. So two questions from Alan Turing in 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Hmm. I don't know, because I would say, I've been a meditator, and I actually took my first meditation class, uh, which was TM, Transcendental Meditation, with my dad when I was a teenager. And, you know, one of the things about having a mantra is to kind of still the noise of thoughts that's almost like a constantly chattering, you know, some people call it like the chattering monkeys. So if you're in that mode and you know, to be still, then the mind can be less active, but then things will always come along. And then you have to return to something like an anchor, like the breath or the mantra to still it again. But it is kind of a constant thing that we will be interrupted by these pesky thoughts.
It's good. You're really teaching me a lot, Al. I appreciate that, what you just said.
Oh, thank
The
you.
yeah, the second turn question is, can machines think?
Ah, boy. I mean, I don't want to get into a whole thing, but you know, there is now a big sort of craze for artificial intelligence. And you know, I went to UC Berkeley, and there's even, you know, Berkeley people who have been developing, you know, some things in the AI field. But I'm very skeptical. You know, putting the word artificial in front of the word intelligence negates, to me, it's not intelligence. I mean, I did enjoy 2001: A Space Odyssey, especially My Name Hal was prominent as the supposedly sentient computer that caused so much mischief. So that was a little foreshadowing that AI may not be all that great.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue?
Something, there was a little hesitation. I didn't hear the question. Sorry. It was.
That's all right. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Hmm. I mean, I think that I sort of look at it as connecting to my purpose, and it's sort of like a mission, you know. And so I've found, you know, I led a lot of my life that I wasn't particularly connected to it, but now it really is, you know, my writing and my poetry that I think is the heart of it. And so I think that, you know, when I'm connected to my purpose, I think that there is more meaning to life. And then there can also be satisfaction and happiness. But in order to experience joy, you experience pain, grief, loss. You can't just have one, you know, because there'd be no contrast.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
Yeah, that's that. Really getting philosophical. You know, I mean, I think there's a certain sense that I'm a part of everything. And there's been lots of different names for that everything. I actually, many years ago, took a comparative religion class in Kathmandu, Nepal. And one of the things, like, for example, in Hinduism, you sort of typically, you know, at the surface think, oh, they have very, very, very many gods. But I learned in that sort of seminar that there's something called Mahabrahma. It's an all encompassing oneness. And that's something that is in certain religions, but also, I think, Einstein, you know, with the unified field theory. So if there is a universal consciousness, then we're part of that.
Yeah, it's good. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, God, there was a little glitch again. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh boy. Well, my thoughts, you know, I couldn't remember the name of this game that you draw stuff, so my thoughts have lagged a little bit, you know. It is a game that probably everybody's played too. It'll
Yeah.
come to me sometime in the next hour, probably. But yeah,
You
the
mean
Speed of Life.
Hal?
What is
Is
it?
it Hangman?
Not
You
Hangman. No, it's a game where you draw, and then the other person has to guess what it is that you. But you can't say words. You can only draw. It's a
oh you
very
can
common
only
game. It's crazy. It's so common. It's crazy. Everybody will know it. But
yeah.
anyway, the speed of light's got to be faster because I forget stuff.
No worries. Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools.
Ah.
What new tool do you suggest?
Ah. I mean, I love Audre Lorde and have read several of her books. I'd say, you know, I don't know if it's new, but the tool of open mindedness and open heartedness to
Yeah,
approach something, because there's definitely things that I used to think or believe, and now I feel differently and think differently about it. So I think those are good
good.
qualities to bring.
Beautiful. I agree 100%. Hal, what new toy do you suggest?
Toy. Well, we're kind of big. My little family, myself, my wife, and daughter are pretty big on stuffed animals, and they're just like comforting, and they're fun, and like I got very overwhelmed a few years ago going into an IKEA store. I don't know if you've been there, but they actually had this big plush dolphin, and I just grabbed it and hugged it. And I was like talking to my daughter because she knows the whole store backwards and forwards. I was like, I need this emotional support dolphin to get me through this. So yeah, I'll go with the plush toys.
I like that. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I'm pretty fortunate, I guess. I mean, my wife, I think, is more of a worrier in terms of, she'll wake up in the middle of the night and have trouble getting back to sleep. I'm, I guess, blessed in that way. May really get very upset about something during the day, something in the news. They're not banning assault weapons, but then by the time the evening time, I generally can get to sleep and stay fairly deep sleep. So fortunate.
That's a good habit. So Marshall McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might be able to learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Hal, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Yeah. I mean, I've wrestled with that in a certain couple of ways. These technological advances, which often have benefits. Definitely, they have obvious benefits, but I've felt some resistance. Like at a certain point, years and years ago, I said, I'm never going to get a microwave oven. I just don't trust that it's completely safe. Well, sometime, more than 20 years ago, probably got a microwave oven. Similar, thing with a cell phone, keeping something, if you're talking on it, keeping something this close to your brain that works on these kinds of transmissions can have harmful effects on the brain. Okay, so I won't ever use a cell phone. Okay, well, so no, I kind of felt, I guess it was a trade-off, but it's probably there probably are some aspects of this progress that are not so good. I mean, we know that.
Yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I know there are artists, and some of them, let's say a visual artist who's very successful, and they're, being rewarded so handsomely that it's hard to think about anything else other than, my last artwork sold for $12 million. But I do think that artists, and maybe especially poets, because we haven't been rewarded so much in the most part financially. But yeah, I think there is a responsibility, and certainly I feel like without morals and ethics, we're not quite as human as we need to be.
Hal, are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm afraid of ideas. There's certainly ideas that, um, when they've been promoted and they're wrong, like this big lie that the November 2020 election was stolen, those are dangerous. I'm not afraid of old or new ideas, but some ideas should be flushed.
I like that word. Hal, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Hmm. I know, sometimes, it can be a little blurred in terms of, I've seen pictures, and then the photograph of me as a baby, I had this little toy ball that was supposed to be the moon, and it had the craters and pock marks. So I don't know if I remember it so much as I've seen the picture and thought, oh, that was my toy. But that goes back quite a ways.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Um, I mean, I think that memory, certainly an individual's memory, as we, age, it's a frightening word, especially to people in Los Angeles and Hollywood, but, we do get older occasionally. And, so long-term memory, is what seems to be more preserved, and the short-term memory doesn't function as much, but also a collective memory of a culture and cultures is very important. I was reading very recently, because I am a UC Berkeley alumni, and so the newsletter featured this woman who has been working to try to preserve Ladino, which is a Judeo Spanish. It's a language that was spoken by Jews in Spain and Turkey and other places, and is kind of receded. I mean, my heritage language was Yiddish, and my grandparents spoke it, my parents understood it, and I just know a few words, so it's diminished a lot. But Ladino is still alive and well, despite having been written off several times. But language and culture definitely go together. We touched on that before.
Super cool. So tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you just briefly, and then outside your immediate family, sort of like a role model, they had an impact on you. And what specifically was that impact?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I think in my family, um, I could say my father, it's something that I actually was um, in a men's weekend retreat at the end of January. And one of the things we focused on was honoring your father as your first teacher. And the date happened to have been January 28th, which would have been my father's birthday. So had he lived, he would have been 92. So that was the actual day or date that, I was doing that activity, as part of this group. And so, yeah, so, I do think a lot about my father, and, you know, um, differing thoughts and feelings, but he was a teacher, I guess you could say, in that sense. And then in terms of outside the family was the second part. Um, Probably Rachel Carson, as the author of Silent Spring, which I read as kind of a young adult, I guess you could say, or maybe late teen, and it just made a tremendous impact on me. And I felt connected to the environmental movement. It's part of something that's been important to me for a long time. And we live in a beautiful world as long as we don't screw it up beyond recognition.
Dude, I am so impressed you named her because she is so important in my life as well. And very few people give her credit. I mean, she is a super powerful what she did. Thank you for saying her name. And so you were raised Jewish. Do you pray?
Yes, I do, and I'm sort of religious, I guess, in my own way. I'm kind of my own category, I guess, because there are certain things that I observe, but I'm not the uh, observant or orthodox in that sense. But yeah, I do pray sometimes with traditional prayers, or sometimes I'll just whatever my heart wants to say.
Yeah. If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Oh boy. uh, Welcome to paradise.
Oh, I like that. Hal, do evil people exist or does evil use people as a vehicle?
What was the last part? Does evil use people? What was that last part?
As a vehicle.
Oh, I think it's something that people have wrestled with, and I've wrestled with, uh, because, sometimes we'll think of a person, like, for example, Charles Manson comes to mind, and you think, well, maybe that person is the embodiment of pure evil. But yet, God created that person. So, what is the source of this evil? And maybe it's an artificial division to say that there is this duality. I mean, it certainly seems like there are really bad people out there, and Charles Manson certainly was one. On the other hand, he wrote songs. He wrote a song that uh, Guns N' Roses recorded. So that's a contribution to culture. He's not a person I admire in any way, Charles Manson, but it's part of the scheme. It's part of the scheme of things, and the plan's too big for us to see it all.
Hal, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'll set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies close. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah, I mean, I have been a big listener to Alan Watts, and he's a great teacher, and Zen. I don't know if you could call him a Zen master per se, but definitely a teacher. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that there is certainly a sense that what you focus on, you give more energy to. But sometimes there are just things that cannot be ignored. They have to be dealt with. And if you're, somehow turning a blind eye to something, but it's like steamrolling down your block, then you're not dealing with it. You're not
Yeah.
dealing with it. But I do have sort of, you know, an example of, again, when you, like, I have a daughter who's a teenager. She's 18 years old now. And, they don't really regularly listen to advice from parents. It's not a thing that's cool. But, my daughter had sort of conflicts with some peers at school. They would say stuff. And so my response was, if you use the so what theory, there's nothing that the person can do, because anything the person says, you're a bitch, so what? You're stupid, so what? I don't like you, so what? There's nothing that they can do that can go beyond that, and eventually they'll run out of stuff. So, but she didn't take my advice, but I still think it's valid.
It's really good. It's a great Miles Davis song too. But
So what? Oh yeah, love
and
Miles.
Nassim Taleb says games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we know who is a hero. When I told someone this, they responded, villains don't think they are bad, they want control. Heroes want freedom.
Huh.
And Gregory Bates, an anthropologist, said when the criminal gets caught, do they go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or do they go, wow, I did something morally and socially wrong? So there's a lot to prompt you. Any thoughts? But the basic question is, does punishment work?
Oh, okay. Because we started with games and heroes.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
you can go off on any of those prompts you like. The games is like, we don't know who wins or loses, but we think we can tell who a hero is.
yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes uh, I like to play the long game in terms of who really, is going to be seen as a hero, and who's going to, if they really have transgressed, when they pay the price, it could be a long, long, long delay. So there is sort of this long game I think that you have to play. But there's actually a new feature that I just discovered, and I think it's on NPR, called Unsung Heroes. And it's really so wonderful, because it's really just a matter of someone did something, out of kindness or out of the goodness of their heart, and it really changed the person's life to the point where many, many years later they still remember and would like to thank that person, but they haven't stayed in touch with that person. And I mean, one example is this woman who had to fly on an airplane with a newborn, and her husband was there, but she was pretty overwhelmed. And then the person who was seated next to them was a nurse, and but just opened her heart and like complimented the new mother and helped the new mother, even held up like a blanket so she could breastfeed. And this was many, many years ago. I think the kid now is 10, so I guess it was about 10 years ago. But she never sort of forgot that person, for that act of kindness.
Nice. And then just your thoughts, does punishment work?
Gosh, I mean, I think that people with a conscience, which I think fortunately is most of us, we have this sort of sociopathic element that I can't really put in that category. But often, if I do something that I think that is morally wrong, I'll be my own worst punisher. So but I mean, society does have rules, and if you break the rules, and sometimes you're well connected and you get off the hook. But if we have the society that we say we want to have, and you break the rules, you got to pay the consequence. But then afterwards, if you've paid, served your time or whatever it is, then reintegrate. Let's let the person have opportunities to work, to vote, to have housing, to live. So don't keep on punishing someone after they've paid the price.
It's good. Yeah, reform. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I mean, I think that, I mean, a novel, uh, like Alice Walker, the novelist Alice Walker comes to mind because some of her novels, I find that the truth is deeper and hits harder than a journalistic book or nonfiction series even. And I think this is, I think it's part of our nature. I mean, Shakespeare would introduce characters, and we would see them in a play, and then we'd see ourselves in a different way. And so that's, I think it is just something wonderful about it. But I also do like going outside and seeing a tree.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you brought up the word truth because Louis Buñuel says, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." So I've said that quote for years, and 99% of people go, "That's good." And one guy goes, "Nope, that's bullshit." Because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. And the cliche goes, the journey is more important than the destination. Why do we have to seek or name a destination if the journey's more important?
Well, I think that um, I want something to strive for, because if everything's all done and in a sense there is this great oneness that we're a part of, so we can just sort of sit in the corner and hum. But there's something to strive for, there's something that I want to create and to share. And so that striving is, well, it's not over yet. It's not over as long as I'm alive and I still feel I have something to contribute.
Yeah. Hal, walk us through your three main callings here. What was the tipping point when you decided to be an educator, when you decided to be a poet, and when you decided to be an activist? Just sort of your background, what you study in college, and you know,
Okay.
a little
Yeah.
run. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the thing that happened with me is, I had Jewish parents. And so your options were become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or an engineer. And so I actually was at Berkeley considering pre law for about 3 weeks. And I was like, nah, not doing that. And so I did sort of land in the accounting sphere of things, but it was mostly because my parents were like, well, we're paying for your education, you've got to come out with something practical, you've got to come out with something that you could earn a living at. And I knew already while I was sitting there at Berkeley that I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know how to translate that into a career that I could support myself at. So I did accounting for about 12 or 13 years, and it wasn't good for me. It was very repetitive, monthly closings of the books. If people are familiar with that, it's the same every month. And it's not creative. There is something called creative accounting, and I sort of did get drawn into that some, and then I got out of it because I realized the people I was working for were not honest. So eventually, I had a condition where, carpal tunnel syndrome. From using the computer, my wrists were hurting and my hands were numb. So at that point, I couldn't do accounting, but also I think it was time for me to make that shift. And my body was telling me, this is what you've got to do to survive, is to give up accounting. And so then I looked around like, what am I qualified to do? Well, I can get teaching credentials and then teach. So that was my next major phase of my life. But I always bounced back and forth between teaching adults and teaching children. Teaching adults was always wonderful to me because they wanted to be there. And teaching children is what you get paid for, because you
Yeah.
can get full-time, work and a salary and even a union and benefits and all that stuff. But it wasn't really what I was cut out for. I feel like I work better with adults. I've worked with students from 2 years and 9 months to 100, and I think my oldest student was 105. So I've worked with students of all ages. I've taught a lot of different subjects, but English, civics, government, are some of the basic things that I think are really important. I happen to be listening again to the soundtrack to Hamilton, the musical, how our government was formed, what were the different ideas that people were wrestling with, and what is this crazy experiment called democracy?
That's good. Hold on one second, Hal. I got to check something.
Okay.
Yeah, hold on.
Probably
Hey,
you're
so
baking some bread,
this,
I'm going to guess.
yeah. Well, this next question concerns education, and it was actually McLuhan saying it in 57.
Okay.
It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. It's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So there's a lot going on in that last part, because teaches more effectively. Any thoughts on that? That differentiation, because you can learn, kids now, they can just learn how to do things on YouTube. Is that entertainment? Well, no, it's sort of a form of tutorial, but a lot of them are very entertaining. And so just that differentiation between education and entertainment, and that line, teaches more effectively. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is that there needs to be engagement, and it sort of has become a buzzword in education, but there really is something that the student has to be activated. And there certainly are students of any age or all age that are sort of self-motivated. So those are the people who there's the fewest problems, because they just need material, and they'll go. But people who are not self-motivated, I think as a teacher, yeah, there is an aspect that you're entertaining, but you really need to engage, because the learning has to be active, and it has to be alive for the learner, whether it's one-on-one or it's a group. So you're not just entertaining, you're kind of getting people real involved in what they're building. They're building knowledge, or they're building skills.
It's really good. And I'm curious now, before we go into activism, let's delve into poetry for a few minutes. What did you read growing up where you went, oh, I can do that? Are you reading poets, or how did you get to pursue poetry?
Yeah. I don't know how old or young I was when I first sort of discovered poetry, but there definitely were poets that who influenced me. Maybe Carl Sandburg. This is going back quite a ways, and so. But in terms of really getting a little more serious about writing, I did come across a wonderful teacher probably about 30 years ago, and he's a teacher of writing, poetry, creative writing, Jack Grapes. And so, he himself is a poet, writer, playwright, very entertaining, very funny, very accomplished teacher. And so, yeah, I mean, that's when, I developed a daily practice of writing in my journal. And this is when it was March 1993, and Jack said, just write 1 or 2 pages every day. And so I've kept that. I've kept that up to the point where it's now almost 30 years later. And even this men's retreat, they had a policy, no pen and no paper for the weekend. And I kind of explained to them, well, I'm kind of on a roll here. I'm getting close to 30 years of this discipline of writing every day. And they were like, oh, yeah, go ahead, do it. So we were like, bunking, and we had like sleeping bags and flashlights. So I have my little book, my notebook, and I just turned on my flashlight. Everybody was already snoring. And I just wrote like, a page or two, and then good night, So yeah, I've done this for nearly 30 years. And, so what it gave me is the like, nobody could say you're not a writer. I write every day. What else do you have to do or be,
Yeah. Well, that's the perfect follow-up is screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a poem?
Oh, I think it's very intentional. I've been asked recently, about like this process of writing and creating, because sometimes I do feel like I'm like in a zone. So there's something going on where it's sort of coming to me, and I don't know exactly where from, but that creative energy and force is flowing, and that's like the best situation, that you just keep that going, and then later on, whatever you've got, you can edit it. But it is very much intentional. I mean, I don't think it's accidental, so it's intentional.
Well,
But the one thing that I would say too is, you know, uh, there are sometimes poems that are very clearly speaking about something in a narrative sense, and it's something that you can easily understand. And then other poems are more abstract, and they might take a little time to delving in to see what is in there. And actually, different readers or listeners can get something different from a poem, so there is that as well. There's still worthwhile, even if it's not something that you can immediately understand on that basic level.
well, you anticipated this, Hal. Thanks. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your poem?
mm, I don't think as much while I'm writing, but maybe while I'm editing or revising. There's always things that and I'm now in a group where there's some critiquing, and they use what's called the critical response process or the critical response method. Which, what the wonderful thing about it is, the person who's created something, and it doesn't have to be a poem, it could be a dance, or it could be a play, or it could be anything. You're in control of the feedback that you get. And so it's structured really wonderfully, this critical response process. So that's what we're using. And so you know, when I'm revising, I might want to know, is this reference something that people understand? Now, I've read poems very recently where I'm like, ooh, there's something in there. I got to look this up. I got to Google this and figure out what this is. You know, like this poet mentioned Elephant Rock, and it wasn't capitalized, but I was like, is that a real place? And so I looked at, there is a place in Iceland called Elephant Rock. So I don't know if that's what the poet meant, but I'm like, wow, it's pretty cool that that's in there.
Yeah. Well, McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Like knife and fork extend our teeth, shutter in a camera, projector extends our eyelid. Even non tangible, say philosophy or religion, might be an extension of consciousness. He says human sensorium. I call it humanness. What does the writing utensil, whether it's a pen or a typewriter, keyboard, what does the writing utensil extend for you? What humanness?
Well, I mean, and I do still stick to the process of using a pen and paper when I'm composing, although editing, the computer is the best tool for revising. But yeah, there is that connection that it's a physical act. Writing, I'm picking up a pen and putting ink onto the paper, and you know, I think I just lost my train of thought.
Well, you were going there. What does the pen or
Oh,
pencil
what does it
extend?
extend? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's somewhere in the heart and the mind realm,
Yeah,
because if poems don't connect with your heart or your mind, then maybe they haven't succeeded.
really good. Hal, what's the function of poetry?
I mean, I think that poetry, you know, it's funny. I worked with someone who put together a little anthology. This was years ago, but she's a wonderful poet and writer, and it was called News from Inside. And so it's kind of a funny way to think about it, that poetry can deliver the news or current events. It kind of seems a little absurd, but yeah, there is something that you can, if it's really succeeding, that you can awaken, you know, something in the person that reads or hears it.
Well, that's perfect lead into activism. What kicked you over into being an activist? I mean, reading Rachel Carson when you did is one thing. She was like, hey, I can be an activist by putting out a book. I mean, she really changed the world. And I
Yeah,
consider her one of the great activists.
yeah,
And you know, there's this new movie I saw the other day. I'll probably win Oscar for best documentary, Blood and the Bloodshed. How Nan Goldwyn Golden, the art photographer, led this demonstration to get these people's names off of all these art museums because they gave art museums a lot of money. Well, they just happened to make all their money inventing Valium and opioids.
oh,
And they did public protest and they got their names off the art museum. It was remarkable because they were like, you know, it was just good old fashioned public protest and
yeah,
you know, being persistent. But you know, activism is huge. I mean, right there in Santa Monica, I did events at Midnight Special Bookstore, one of the great political bookstores of all time, for years, and we would just have great speakers say, here's the problem, and then the big question was, well, what can you do about it? Yeah,
yeah,
write your congressperson, you know,
yeah.
hold a protest sign and boycott. So, you know, just overall, what did your parents turn you into being an activist? Did your culture, did someone specific give us sort of the history of what really got you into activism?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned the Midnight Special, and that was a fantastic bookstore that it was very important to me. And then, I saw how a Borders opened up across the street, and then later on Amazon killed them both.
Yeah.
So it is pretty sad, but that was a wonderful special place. I would sometimes do poetry readings at the Midnight Special and a few other places like that, coffee houses. But yeah, I mean, in terms of becoming an activist, I think, I would get involved in different things, over the years. One of the issues, that I got involved in pretty young was world hunger. I mean, that is you know, literally a global issue, and seemingly very difficult to make a difference. And at other times, I kind of, when I was at Berkeley, I would go to a Tibetan Buddhist meditation center, which was in the Berkeley Hills, not too far from campus. It's still there, the Nyingma Institute. And so I learned, besides the meditation and chanting and the being able to have some stress relief from midterms and finals, but also learned about Tibetan culture and how they were crushed by, the invasion of China. And then our US CIA helped rescue the Dalai Lama and bring him to India. And so I was involved for a time with Los Angeles Friends of Tibet, and doing some, work, again, that's a pretty tough issue, because even to this day, Tibet is not free, and the things still go on, that they're, moving populations in that don't belong there to try to dilute the percentage of ethnic Tibetans. Anyway, I've been involved in just a bunch of things at different times, but I think it is good to want to make a difference, and to not give up, even though,
Yeah.
some of these problems are seemingly intractable.
Yeah. Yeah. Not giving up. What a great persistence, compulsion. Utah Phillips says anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, I mean, I certainly do believe in the democratic process, as slow and imperfect and inefficient as it is. I still think it's the best thing that we've got. And there are some people who've been in public service for the right reasons. And Henry Waxman, even Sheila Kuehl, there's quite a few, but certainly not the majority. I mean, I like one of our congressmen now, Ted Lieu. I mean, there are some tremendous people out there trying to do the right thing. One of my neighbors in Santa Monica has just been appointed a judge. And he was in, Sacramento, and sort of thought he was retiring, and now he's going to be working in the courthouse downtown. So, yeah, I mean, if people are in it and they have integrity, then go for it. But, if they're corrupt, then stay away.
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Well, I mean, certainly there are certain rights that individuals can enjoy and exercise, and freedoms, but there are some limitations, naturally, to free speech. You can't incite someone to a riot. That's not acceptable free speech. But yeah, so there is a responsibility as a citizen. And one of the things that I got a privilege to, as an ESL teacher, to witness the citizenship ceremony when someone comes to this country and goes through that process and becomes a citizen, they do not take it for granted, because it's not that easy, and it's a
Yeah.
long process. And so they're like new Americans and welcoming them. I mean, it really is very moving.
What's very good. What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Ah, boy. It kind of reminds me of like the rock group The Clash, who I did have an opportunity to see them in concert. And, it's like revolution that you can dance to.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there's always, something to rebel against. I mean, I think there's a famous line, well, what, maybe it's even rebel without a cause. What are you rebelling against? What have you got? You know,
Yeah.
so it is something that particularly, I guess, youth, strive for, is to make their own mark and not just accept, which is good. There's a good aspect to that. Not just accept the things that were in place before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually Brando in The Wild One. That was a great,
Okay.
great,
Okay.
great quote, though.
Okay.
So, a socialist, John Basil Barnhill, said, "Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty." In 2005, the film V for Vendetta paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears? Like the government creates this thing called the war on drugs or war on poverty, war on terror. Well, you can't have a war on drugs because drugs don't fight. And you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So, how do you personally handle these false fears?
Well, I mean, it's you know these when these things like being an adult during the Ronald Reagan era, which was a very unfortunate time in my view, that he was California governor and that he was president of the United States. And so, I mean, those things are sort of force fed to people, dumped on people. A lot of people buy into it, with Nancy Reagan, who was like, to me, a phony, hollow shell of a person, and Ronald as well. So yeah, just say no to drugs. It's really bullshit. So I guess the thing to do is to just call it that. And,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's unavoidable because it's captured, people's consciousness, but it's still bullshit nonetheless.
Call it out. Good. Jean-Luc Godard told Michael Moore when he premiered Fahrenheit 9/11 at the Cannes Film Festival, this film is going to help Bush get elected. Well, it didn't get Bush elected per se, but it galvanized pro-Bushers. We've had a slew of political docs over the last 20, 30 years. Do they more activate or more pacify?
Uh, I don't know. I mean, I can think of, the Al Gore film, the title is just
Inconvenient
Truth.
truth.
Inconvenient Truth. Yeah. I mean, I think that, the people who don't choose to accept that climate change is real and that humans caused it. And I already knew this at Berkeley in the late 1970s. It was already being discussed and it was already public knowledge. So the people who choose not to subscribe to this scientific fact are being, in a sense, bribed by whatever economic forces are funding this need to continue fossil fuel, propaganda and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a bit tough sometimes.
How can we keep our governments from going to war?
Oh boy, it certainly. I mean, in my family history, my grandfather, who was born in Poland, decided as a pretty young person, probably about 20 years old, that he did not want to be part of this war that Russia was preparing to fight against Japan. And ultimately, it did not go well for Russia. But my grandfather was like, this ain't my fight. So he came to the United States. My grandmother came to this United States. And, so avoiding war can be a good thing. Now, my father's older brother fought in World War II and was actually involved in the storming of the beach at Normandy. He never talked about it, but he was there in the real situation that the film Saving Private Ryan depicted. So, that was a fight. There were Americans who were against getting involved in World War II, but that, I think, was the right fight. A lot of these other wars, like Vietnam, bullshit. Afghanistan, bullshit.
Yeah.
It's not the right thing to get involved in, and didn't end up doing any good. And war is so destructive to the environment and to humanity.
What does courage mean to you now?
I think that courage is if there's something about myself that I might have been afraid to face, and then I can accept that and then, speak my truth.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
And they certainly both have their place. If you have people who are very strong in their convictions, they're very likely going to get something done, but you don't achieve everything. Like Ralph Nader was another example. He got seatbelts, he got airbags. You don't necessarily get everything. We had the 55-mile speed limit for a while. That went away. But, so you do have to compromise because you deal with reality, and that's, you can't achieve perfection.
Is perception reality?
Well, certainly I'm filtering, the world through my perceptions and kind of assembling my schema and my way of viewing the world. And so that is my reality, but I'm also open to that there may be other realities. I'm not necessarily a believer in the multiverse. I think that one universe is probably enough, but yeah, I'm open to new thoughts.
Hal, rate these three elements in your accomplishments: luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Oh boy. Well, certainly there is an aspect to luck, to having been born, into a place where, I did not have to struggle as much, in terms of I had a roof over my head as a child, we had food, all those kinds of things. So that's, I think, luck to some extent, although some people might say that there's karma and things go around and come around. Like somebody even said, if you find like a whole pile of money, then it may be that you're being paid back for something in a previous lifetime. So I don't know about that kind of accounting, but yeah.
A poet said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Yeah, when we find the moments in life, these moments that are so rich, and that when I'm so connected, then often I'll say that there are no words, but yet it's sort of my task as a poet to put words to that experience, and you know, it'll succeed or it may not.
What do you think that was the motive of the cave artist?
Oh boy, there were some pretty damn good artists back then. I mean, they knew what the heck they were doing. I mean, they had some technique. They were feeling something, and they put it out there in colors that lasted a hell of a long time. So I don't, there's definitely something to that. And yeah, I mean, art really uh, is a part of life that just adds a certain richness, I think.
Yeah. Well, two of my film heroes have a mantra. It goes, George Manupelli says, there is no, he says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So it's a stupid question. I know it's both and it depends, but just your prompt you any thoughts on this. Is art making, poetry making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever cultures, technologies, and environments are dominant?
I mean, certainly there have been times when it does feel like something's coming to me or something's coming through me. Not always, but that's that being in the zone, um, you know, aspect to it. Well, there was another part to the question.
Well,
Um,
it's is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle or a channel?
yeah. I mean, I do put a pretty high value on self expression, and for better or worse, I think I would go with that.
Can art making be egoless?
I mean, there always is, this I consciousness. The question is, am I, uh, thinking that you know my point of view is the only point of view, or that I'm inextricably linked to this ego and maybe there's nothing beyond that. So those are sort of limitations. But yeah, I think that there's a place for the ego, but keep it in its place.
Yeah. McLuhan probed Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, saying artists dream awake. And not to sound elitist, but everybody has these incredible powers to create scenarios in the middle of the night when they're sleeping. And artists do this while they're awake. They dream awake. Have dreams played a role in your creative process?
Yes, in fact, I use a pen name, and it just came to me within the last year in a dream. And I actually have published a poem in the Free Venice Beachhead, that's how you and I kind of got connected initially. So I used the name William Bearclaw, and it's literally just came to me as I was about to wake up, and I was like, I better write this down. And so there is, like, I kind of feel that there is a significance. I kind of unpack it a little bit, because like William, there's like two big famous Williams that I can think of: William the Conqueror, but like the conquering that needs to be done is the Donald Trump energy. So that's William the Conqueror, and then William Shakespeare. And my name Hal actually came from my mother named me after, Henry V was known as Prince Hal. So that's how I came to be Hal. So, and then the bear claw part, a lot of our, like going to summer camp as a kid, and they were like Indian sort of camps, and I went to a few of those. I also went to a couple of Jewish camps, but even the Indian camps were run by Jewish people. But in any case, that sort of, so Bear Claw has that aspect of, the indigenous, that energy of the indigenous that kind of can cut through things, but also it's a really tasty Danish.
Hello. That was beautiful. And I do have to thank you, Hal, for reaching out. Very few people give me any feedback on my articles in the Beachhead, and you actually reached out to talk to me about it. So I appreciate that. Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Well, I mean, I think there's a certain experience, and I've had a couple of experiences, like even where I think that I was dreaming. My father had passed away. He died in 2003. That I was dreaming, and I felt that my father like put my hand on my arm, touched me, and then it's very hard to really describe, but it really is like a very deep sort of feeling and connection. So I don't think it's so much believing in the impossible, but it's having to believe when I've experienced something, and it is that sort of transcendent thing that I have to believe it because it's real, it happened, and maybe it's hard to explain, but there it is.
No, I like when people take the wording on my question and sort of shift it. I'm open to that. And it's having to believe. Really well done. So tell me one major element of your creativeness that stayed the same and one major element that's changed in the years you've been doing it.
Well, I think that something that stayed the same is I like to call upon intuition and feelings, and sort of combine it with a intelligent consciousness, not AI, the real fucking intelligence. And so that's something that I think carries through and has continued. And then I think just something that's changes is I want to develop and grow as a human being, but as a writer and as a poet. So I may look at some of the poems that I've written as a younger poet, and I can see value. But if I'm assembling, and one of my goals is to assemble a book to put together a collection of my poems, I'm probably going to look at things that are current and moving forward, because since I believe that I'm developing, I don't necessarily want some of the things to include some of the things from 20 years ago, even though they might have been great at the time, but I'm kind of moving forward.
Really cool. Hal, we got about 10 more minutes. I really appreciate your time. This has been fun. And Moshe Feldenkrais said it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Oh boy. Well, that is, I've got a great example, but also I've been taking Feldenkrais classes at Santa Monica Yoga, my local yoga studio that I can walk to, but also they stream online. If there's people watching this in Bangladesh and they want to go to santamonicayoga.com, there's a Feldenkrais class every Wednesday. But so I think my most sort of vivid example is in September last year, a week before my birthday, I had a stroke. I had a very minor ischemic stroke. So the reason I'm saying that it's minor is doctors have said it's very, very, very small, but that's what it was. That's fucking what it was. And so that, is not wonderful when something happens in your brain and affects your body and so forth. I mean, really what I've had is a little bit of tingling in my left hand, and sometimes the way my eyelids close feels a little off. But other than that, I'm great. And I met someone across the street who had a major stroke, and I've talked to him a number of times. And, he said it really changed his life. And, I have a lot of compassion. But what I've done with it is I've said, okay, I've tended to procrastinate about things in my life that I've wanted to do. So now I've had this wake up call, like I could have died, you know, and I did go to the ER, and I was in the ER Labor Day weekend. Last year was not fun. But I'm using this experience to say, what are the things that I now want to do that I've been putting off? And the two of the things that I decided to do were to really get involved in men's work, and I did this mountain weekend retreat end of January in Santa Barbara, Santa Ynez, and it was beautiful, and it was a wonderful group of men. And I think it is important work, for men to, because a lot of ways we've been competitive with men, but there's also a lot we can learn from and give to other men. And then the other thing is poetry. And so I have been in this 12-week online intensive poetry writing, and they have creative writing, they have creative nonfiction. There's 2 cohorts of poetry. And so it's a program called Pocket MFA. It's not a degree granting program, but they use the MFA as an analogy. But it's actually something that's really wonderful. And I'm in the first cohort. So it's a new program. I just discovered it, and I was like, I'm going to go for it because I'm still alive and I don't know how long I will be. And so if anybody is interested, it's pocket-mfa.com, and it is a wonderful writing program. They've got a tremendous thing that they've put together, and it's spurring me on to develop myself and to try to get my work out there. So that experience of kind of a near-death medical experience to then propel myself to live life more fully as much as I can.
Beautiful. So well put. And keep sending those poems to the beachhead. We need them.
Okay.
How do you find peace of mind?
I mean, there have been some wonderful teachers, including teachers of meditation and spirituality. I've been in a very challenging journey along with my wife of raising a daughter with special needs, and she's 18 and she's going to be graduating high school in June. So that part of the journey, the K through 12 education and special education part of the journey, is almost done. It's life as a parent is never done, but it's quite a challenging reason to continue every day. And so finding peace of mind, in I guess in spite of, but also there is the reward of doing this very difficult job of being a parent and being a decent human being.
Heavy thing you got there. That's beautiful. You've stuck with it, and it's a real challenge. My family's been involved in that special needs for many years, and it really has changed the whole social aspects of how we perceive it, but it still needs a lot of work. So here's 5 Alan Watts questions, just off the top of your head in a few words. Number 1, who started it all?
Well, I mean, I guess I do believe that there is a creator. Some people don't like to use the term God. I subscribe to a rabbi who's one of the officials at my wedding 21 years ago. This guy, Rabbi Brian Zachary Mayer, and his organization is called Religion Outside the Box. So it's very much outside the box is the key part. And even the word religion can turn a lot of people off. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we're all an accident.
Yeah. Second, Alan Watts is, are we good?
I couldn't catch.
Yeah. The second Alan Watts is, are we going to make it?
Are we going to make it? Well, I still do maintain optimism. I mean, I feel like there's an aspect of working for peace, and that's one of the things we touched on is like, can we as humans get along despite conflicts? Can we get along and can we, somehow find, a way to coexist? So I'm hopeful.
Third is, where do we put it?
Where do we put it? Oh boy. Well, I put my pen on the paper.
That's good. The fourth is, who's cleaning it up?
Who's cleaning it up? Well, I mean, my sort of personal philosophy is, I'll try to clean up my own mess, but there are some messes from previous generations, and I'm a little disturbed that this nuclear power plant, it's a Diablo Canyon, is not being shut down. I do like our governor, Gavin Newsom, but I think he's wrong on this issue because there's really no safe way, and there has never been a safe way to deal with or dispose of nuclear waste. So we do have some messes from previous generations, but I'll try to clean up my own mess too.
Fifth, is it serious?
I think that levity and lightheartedness, I mean, certainly, the journey that my wife and I have been on, and my daughter also has a quirky sense of humor. So without that, it would have been tough. I mean, I even made a funny little song. I know we're kind of running towards the end of the time, but the song goes, the will to live is the will to live, the will to live is the will to live, the will to live is the will to live, and that is what I've lost. The will to live is the will to live, the will to live is the will to live, the will to live is the will to live, and that is what I lack. Hey! So, sense of humor.
Hal, that is beautiful, man. I love it when someone does something actual, original on these podcasts. And it really brings us to the other reason you called me was your interest in Frank Zappa. And I mean, we could do another 90 minutes on him, but just briefly, you became a Zappa fan and followed his music. How has Frank shaped your behavior?
I mean, I think he's just been such a great example and role model for someone who wanted to carve their own way and not fit into the mold and not care, if people were trying to censor or shut down, but also including the best artists, including artists of color, all these things to go up against some authorities but to just make fantastic music in several genres. It is inspiring, and I just really think he was a great artist and composer.
Yep. Still lives. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Hang in there.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Well, I mean, I don't know how good it is, but I mean, having sex with multiple partners is supposedly something that men famously sort of chase after. I mean, in my younger life, the closest thing to that was these two women who I worked with, but I had them one at a time, not together. So that was the closest thing. But I don't aspire to that. I am in a loving 21-year marriage that's continuing, and so I'm a one woman man.
Bravo to you, sir. That's beautiful. Two more and we're out of here. Thank you so much, Hal. It's been enlightening. Thornton Wilder said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I mean, I do come back to peace, because even like within me, I have to recognize that there are violent impulses that I've dealt with. And so, it's not a foregone conclusion that, peace is going to reign supreme, but I'd like it to. So I'm hoping that's the direction that I can go and that we can go.
It's good. What gives you the most optimism?
Well, I do, find that a lot of young people seem to have an approach that, we can make some positive changes. We see things and we've inherited a mess, and we want, to make things better. Whether it's some of the survivors of the Parkland massacre in Florida, to our Scandinavian young lady with autism, which is what my daughter has. There's a lot of people can make a difference, and some of them are young, and some of us are more mature, and we still want to make a difference.
Yeah. It's the answer I get the most, and it's really encouraging. Youth, the young. In fact, the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich says the best thing for a human being is another human being. Last question, what gives you the most optimism, is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So it's sure been fun sharing this time with another person. Thank you so much, Hal. And
well,
even though
you've been an interesting young man, and I'd like to go on talking to you, but now it's time to play You Bet Your Life.
And before I hit the end broadcast button, I got to encourage you, come to our Venice West Venice Beats event April 2nd, where we celebrate the great Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and all the local Venice poets and artists and musicians. And so much. Thank you so much, Hal. This has been truly enlightening. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope we can keep on talking forever and ever.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been fun.
Thanks a lot.